online right, by which I mean partly influencers and partly a broader constituency of younger, culturally right-wing, they might not even call themselves conservatives, right-wing populists, perhaps. That is an important part of the Trump base. And Elon Musk, in terms of being a voice of dissent, does have real capacity to cause Trump problems there, to muddy Trump up with those people. That, I think, is a different question than with the quote unquote establishment, which Trump has basically put into a much more tight grip of his own these days.
Yeah, Dan, with the so-called establishment, those within the Trump administration, Musk had scrapped with Trump's top trade advisor, Pete Navarro, and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent as well. Do you think that he had worn out his welcome in the administration's power centers?
Look, it comes down to like Trump needed Musk, just like Musk needed Trump. And I think when you look at Navarro and some of the other issues that have happened there, Musk has significant power. And he also has his pulse in terms of what's happened in China, as well as supply chain and what tariffs mean. So I would actually view it differently. I mean, yeah, worn out the welcome, but I'd say ultimately Musk just got more and more frustrated. And as a CEO of Tesla and focused on SpaceX and all of his other initiatives, he had to leave because of the brand issues related to Trump and Doge. So I think it was a two-way street. But it comes down to, especially when it comes to midterm elections, Republicans need Trump, but they also need Musk.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point that you're making. Fez, how much influence do you think Musk still wields with Republicans because of his enormous personal fortune and also his ownership of, perhaps the most preeminent social media platform for politics, X, especially in light of those midterm elections coming up halfway through next year?
Yeah, Musk has demonstrated that he is essentially a kingmaker. One of his lines of attack on Trump was, without me, Trump wouldn't have won the 2024 election. And that rang true for so many people across the spectrum. 275 million or north of $275 million toward putting Trump and other Republicans in office. That is nothing to sneeze at. And as soon as Musk, wields this massive megaphone that he has in X against any candidate, he can make their life a living hell.
And yet, Mal, he wasn't able to do that recently with the Wisconsin, I believe, Supreme Court race, right? And so he does obviously have enormous power, but it can't be used to the effect that he wants every time.
That's right. And this goes to a long-established fact in American politics, which is that on the one hand, money is extremely important. You have to have a certain amount of finance to be viable. But money does not guarantee victory in elections. And there's been all sorts of candidates in history who have spent large amounts of their personal fortune to try to get themselves elected and have failed. So on the one hand, yes, that massive amount of money, well over $250 million that Elon Musk spent last year on the election of Trump primarily. Yes, of course, that's important. You're better having $250 million backing you than not, or than going against you. But you mentioned the Wisconsin Supreme Court race where he and allied groups put a lot of money behind the conservative candidate to be on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and that candidate lost by a fairly significant margin to the Liberal candidate. Relatedly, as it pertains to the specifics of Musk, it is perhaps worth emphasizing, Elizabeth, that opinion polls consistently show him even less popular than Trump. And of course, Trump's a very divisive figure. In the general population, Elon Musk is pretty widely disliked. His approval ratings with women in particular are pretty disastrous. And so he can have negative impacts, even as he has been able to put this enormous capital into the service of Republican and conservative candidates, none more famously than the case of President Trump.
And again, Dan, we've seen that how Musk behaves has an impact on his companies, especially Tesla, perhaps the most profitable. Why is he deciding to go up against the US president when his companies rely on government contracts and subsidies? How damaging could this be for Musk?
Look, and Fez knows as well, but the reality is that NASA relies on SpaceX. So let's just be clear. You could threaten contracts. There's a better chance of me playing the NBA than them cutting SpaceX because they need space. There's no choice. SpaceX is ultimately the foundation of the U.S. space program. So when you look at everything going on,
sure, they need. Yeah, they need SpaceX, and there's been, you know, the two, Musk and Trump, have been attacking each other over Musk threatening to not use his Dragon capsule to send astronauts to and from the International Space Station. But doesn't Musk need the government more, you know, around regulations for Tesla, for self-driving cars and artificial intelligence?
Yeah, and look, no doubt, we've said you don't want Trump to go from a friend or a BFF to an enemy, from a regulatory, autonomous in terms of the roadmap. And that's why cooler heads need to prevail. In other words, these two in the sandbox, the play date needs to be back on. I do believe behind closed doors, it will start to get worked out. But it speaks why Tesla was down so much. You cannot have Trump as an enemy of Musk and Tesla.
Fez, how do you see this feud and the impact that it will have on Musk's companies, or might have, depending on whether they're able to patch things up or not? And why do you think this was something worth doing for Musk, having a fallout with the US president?
I'll take the first question first, if you don't mind. Musk has shown a propensity to have just a very high tolerance for risk. Investors know, even the biggest bulls know, that Musk is not always, he won't appear to compromise his principles just to gain a dollar at the end of the day. And if you look at Tesla investors, I mean, these are the folks who are in the lurch throughout this whole ride. I mean, Tesla spiked on the news of Musk having a close relationship with the president. Tesla faced all of this blowback from Musk's close relationship with the president and from Doge. The stock tanked. Musk had ultimately to return his attention to the business, and then he picks a feud with the president. So you might be sitting here and thinking, as many are, you know, what is the strategy here? How is this good for Tesla? And what must the Tesla investors who are just completely caught in the lurch, what must they be feeling? That is not how Musk thinks. He has a very high tolerance for risk. And if he believes in the principle, regardless of how you might feel about the man or the principle itself, he will be vocal about it.
Niall, you can have an extremely high tolerance for risk, but then dealing with the president of the United States, especially this one, I mean, that's a whole another kettle of fish, isn't it?
Mm. Oh,
and
certainly.
Especially one that has, that is not shy of using federal agencies against his opponents.
Well, exactly. That's what I was just about to say. We have a president right now who is uncommonly prone to use the levers of the federal government to try to exact vengeance on his enemies. And we have seen that in the case of law firms. We've seen it in relation to FBI agents who investigated the Capitol riot on January the 6th. We have seen it in relation to universities and so on and so forth. In relation to Elon Musk and the risks involved, it is worth also, I think, getting back to what might be considered the more critical or anti-Musk interpretation of what has happened here with Trump, not just in the past week, but over the past few months. In a certain sense, you know, what Elon Musk did last year with all that money isn't all that uncommon. He bought himself a position of power and influence. He, having spent all that money to get Donald Trump elected, was placed at the heart of government, albeit in this sort of quasi-official role. And much of Doge's work in effect hollowed out the departments that either were or could have regulated Musk's companies or scrutinized Musk's companies. So he bought access and influence and got what he paid for to a large extent. Now he is apparently raising objection to the spending bill. Trump says he's actually objecting to the elimination or erosion of business incentives to buy Teslas. But while Musk is a one-off figure, the pattern here is not all that unique. Rich people buying political influence is a trend that we have seen, sadly, for particularly in recent decades here in the United States.
And Dan, perhaps we've never seen it as much as we are right now, right, with this Trump administration's relationship with extreme wealth and corporate power. Do you think that what we're seeing between Trump and Musk, that it could lead to a fraying of that union, or is this just between these two men?
No, I mean, it's spread out. I mean, think about it, you go back to inauguration, every big tech CEO is in the room. I mean, a lot of senators were in the overflow room. But then you look at China. China, in terms of the tariffs and what's happening there, that's the hearts and lungs of U.S. tech. That's not something that was ever on the table going into, I think going into inauguration, even the beginning, that big tech CEOs thought. You will continue to see tension. You've seen tension with Jensen from NVIDIA, Cook in terms of Apple, obviously Musk, and it's going to continue. Yeah, so I don't view this as, everyone's holding hands, smiling.
And Fez, is picking up on what Dan said and how he sees it, do you think that it's necessarily, like, is it a good or a bad thing if it sheds light on that relationship between the US government and with, big tech, extreme wealth?
Yeah, I mean, this is a post, Citizens United reality in the United States. There's obviously a massive amount of entrenched power in Silicon Valley, similar to other power centers in the United States. I mean, New York being one of them. But if you look at tech itself, I mean, Musk has basically given these tech entrepreneurs a roadmap for how you influence policy in Washington. And it's not some sort of like the Musk playbook is not some indirect, nuanced influence operation. He took over, as one of your guests point out, in this quasi-official capacity, a large part of the federal government.
Yeah, and Niall, coming back to a point that you were making earlier about the amount of money that Musk spent, and you think that he pretty much got his money's worth, but when it comes to that quasi role as the head of the Department of Government Efficiency or DOGE, do you think that Musk was something of a fall guy for that agency and all of its troubles and criticisms? He did take a lot of the heat on DOGE. He said that there's